conversations we've been having in the Fort Pierre office with some of our biologists regarding Atlantic salmon and whether we can stock this species to improve our salmon fishery on Lake Oahe. So I was just going to bring the idea to you guys, and we've already talked obviously with John and Gino and everybody, and I think it's a program we want to move ahead with, but we just wanted to let you know and gain input both from you guys and from the public as we go. Quick overview of our this presentation, just a really quick history of the Lake Oahe Salmon Program. Most of you guys are fairly familiar, I assume, with the salmon program on Lake Oahe. Talk about the current status of the Chinook salmon and status of how many were harvested in the past. A little description of Atlantic salmon. A lot of people, believe it or not, don't know what Atlantic salmon are, so quick description, where they're located. Go through some potential benefits and potential drawbacks, and this is really why we're considering Atlantic salmon in Lake Oahe, because of what they've been shown to do in other systems. And then finally, what our plans are, and of course a method to get public input the whole way. So a quick history of Lake Oahe salmon fishery. In the 1970s, South Dakota began experimenting with some different cold water fish species. We've tried rainbow trout, brown trout, steelhead, kokanee salmon, believe it or not. In 1976, North Dakota stocked Chinook salmon. FCS means fall Chinook salmon, which is the type of salmon that we have. But North Dakota actually stocked them first in 1976. And just a few years after they stocked them, they started having very high success. And so we looked to North Dakota and kind of mirrored what they did. And in 1982, we started stocking Chinook salmon in Lake Oahe. And for all intents and purposes, it was a very big success. It provides a very unique fishing experience. You talk about Chinook salmon, there's only 3 populations for hundreds of miles where you can go and catch Chinook salmon. If you look at just Lake Oahe, from our creel efforts, we see on average more than 50% of our anglers drive more than 200 miles one way just to fish Chinook salmon. So it really is a destination fishery for the majority of the people that are fishing Chinook salmon. And then obviously when you have this many anglers traveling this far a distance, it generates a lot of money. And so we use some models from Fish and Wildlife Service, and we estimate that up to $2.5 million is generated each year by our salmon program. And this is not license sales or anything like that. This is gas money, food, hotel stays, equipment, bait, all that stuff. So when you look at the central South Dakota and South Dakota in general, it is an important fishery. So this is just a history of the harvest of Chinook salmon on Lake Oahe, going back to 1991 on the x-axis. And again, it's just the number of salmon harvested. And you can see with a lot of our fish populations, it goes up and down quite a bit. The one thing that the Lake Oahe salmon is really tied to is flood events. And everybody remembers 2011 flood, and they were catching salmon all the way down in Nebraska. Our salmonids are very susceptible for moving through the impoundments and being washed out of systems. But on average, taking this into account even, we see about 5,000, just over 5,000 salmon harvested every year, which sounds good, but when you look at the number of fish that we stock, we're looking at about a 2% return to angler. So about 2% of every salmon that we put in Lake Oahe actually make their way back to the angler. And so, we started looking at our salmon program and said, well, what can we do to make this better? And really, we said to ourselves, why do we want to try to stock Atlantic salmon? And, the best way to answer that is with another question is, how can we make it better? And, this is the first method, the first step that we can try to make it a better salmon fishery, improve that return to angler, get more fish in the hands of the fishermen. Now, Atlantic salmon, obviously, they're native to the East Coast, Atlantic Ocean, native to the northeastern states. They're a sea-run salmon, like most of the other salmonids. Spend most of their adult life in the Atlantic Ocean. Move up into the streams and tributaries to spawn. Eggs stay in the streams and tributaries through the first winter. They hatch out, and after smoltification, they go back out into the ocean. Now, a small portion of these salmonids actually have native populations in landlocked lakes in the Northeast, and this just occurred through natural occurrence. Some of these streams have a lake that's associated with it. They get in there and they can spend their entire life in some of those lakes. So beyond where they're native, they've been stocked, extensively through, the Great Lakes region and the West Coast. And right now, Michigan DNR is actually revamping their Atlantic salmon program, and they're converting a couple hatcheries to an exclusive Atlantic salmon hatchery. And so, talking to these individuals, we wanted to figure out, they're making this big switch. Why are they doing this? Why is Atlantic salmon the hot ticket item right now? And so, we started talking to these guys. We started looking at publications, and we actually started realizing that there's a lot of potential benefits for Atlantic salmon versus our Chinook salmon that we stock. One of the potential benefits that really caught our eye is that, when you look one-to-one Atlantic salmon to Chinook salmon or some of our other trout species, Atlantic salmon appear to be easier to catch for one reason or another, whether they're more aggressive, whether they're not as lure shy, or they'll take a lure better than some of the other salmonid species. When they have, all things being equal, Atlantic salmon tend to be caught more often than a lot of our other salmonid species. Another potential benefit is that they live a little bit longer than our Chinook salmon. Right now, Chinook salmon live between 3 or 4 years. Atlantic salmon live, between 4, 5 years, all the way up to 8 years. They're repeat spawners, can spawn 2, maybe 3 times. When you look at our salmon population on Lake Oahe, every salmon that reproduces, after it reproduces, it dies. And that's a big waste for us. That's a lot of time and energy that we put into a sport fish and grow it up, and then after it spawns, it's no longer available to our anglers. With Atlantic salmon, they can go through that reproduction process once, maybe even twice, and still be available to our anglers. Now, they still need cold water, clear, cold water to spawn, so, we're confident there won't be any natural reproduction, so it'll still be a population that's controlled by Game Fish and Parks through hatchery propagation, but they will be able to remain in the system a little bit longer. They use somewhat shallower water. They're actually, they can survive in a little bit warmer water, so because of that, they move into shallower water, and because of that, they are available in some systems to longliners and people actually fishing from shore, depending on what the water temperature is. Right now, a lot of our Chinook salmon are caught on downriggers and kind of a specialized tactic for catching these fish, where if you move to Atlantic salmon, those fish will be available to a wider array of anglers. People that are, using deep water trolling or something like that will be able to catch these Atlantic salmon, where with our Chinooks, generally they're much deeper in the water column. A big one, they're not as reliant on rainbow smelt. They're actually, Atlantic salmon are found in a lot of systems that don't even have rainbow smelt, and they do very well. In systems where there are rainbow smelt, they do use them when rainbow smelt are abundant. Obviously, if there's a lot of prey fish out there, they're going to use them, but they also eat they consume a lot of other different prey items, from invertebrates to different types of prey fish and whatnot, which is good because we see, when our rainbow smelt numbers are down, we do see our condition of our Chinooks decrease quite a bit. So there will not be as strong of a tie between rainbow smelt and Atlantic salmon. And then finally, we see in the literature there's higher post-stocking survival of our Atlantic salmon compared to Chinook salmon. And this is important because, as soon as we stock these fish into the lake, every fish that's consumed is not going to make it back to an angler. So anytime we can increase survival of those fish, more adult fish are going to be available for anglers to utilize. With Chinook salmon, it appears that they stay in close to shore right after we stock them, and a lot of our predator species take advantage of our little Chinook salmon right when we stock them. With Atlantic salmon, when they stock them, they actually move offshore fairly quickly, and because of that, there's less predators, and that interaction, that chance of mortality drops significantly. So those are some of the benefits that we've seen in other systems and that are in the literature. But again, there are some potential drawbacks. And I should say that with both the drawbacks and the benefits, we won't know for sure. That's why we have to evaluate this species. But there are some potential drawbacks. One of them is downstream movements through Oahe Dam. All salmonids have a propensity to want to go downstream right after we stock them. We see that with our rainbow trout, and we stocked them back in the 1980s. When we stocked Lake Oahe, the tail race in Lake Sharp became a very good trout fishery because there's a want or a desire, I don't know how you would say it, but these fish tend to move downstream for rainbow trout. With our Chinooks, they tend to stay put a little bit better. With Atlantic salmon, we won't know until we actually try it whether these fish will stay in Lake Oahe or whether they will move downstream. The idea that these fish can be found in shallower water is a kind of a double-edged sword because, there's a lot of people that have spent a lot of time refining their techniques to be able to target Chinook salmon. With Atlantic salmon, they are in a little bit warmer water, so they can spread out a little bit. And so whether our anglers will be able to adapt and be able to target these fish, we won't know until we evaluate. That's another thing that, until we put them in there, until the anglers start getting on those fish, we won't know if they'll be able to target them. And, another one that we need to talk about is size too. In other systems, Atlantics tend to be smaller than Chinook salmon. Now this changes based on the system, and like everything else, we won't know until, until we stock Lake Oahe. But in general, they're a couple pounds smaller than our Chinooks. Now, how big will they be in Lake Oahe? Again, it's a system unlike most systems that they're found in right now. So, we're a little uncertain. Most of the Atlantic salmon that we see, the average size caught is 2 or 3 pounds. When you look at the average size of Chinook caught from Lake Oahe, it's only just under 5 pounds. So, if we use the law of averages and what they see in other systems, they'd probably be a little bit smaller than what we see for Chinooks. So those are the benefits and the drawbacks. What are we planning to do right now? And again, these are, just kind of a loose plan. It's a couple years out, but what we'd like to do is stock Atlantic salmon for 4 years, and that'd be from 2016 through 2019. Again, continue to stock Chinook salmon and use our return to angler to evaluate, this species as a potential sport fish. And by return to angler, again, this is the percent of the fish that we stock that make it back into the angler's hands. And it's important to do this alongside Chinook salmon so we can compare 1-to-1 whether, what's making it back into our angler's hands, or is it Chinook salmon or is it Atlantic salmon? Public input is going to be crucial along the way. Right now, we've kind of outlined 2 avenues to get public input, and this is going to be through our in-person and different multimedia sources. This next summer, we will be creeling with, on Lake Oahe, obviously, and one of the angler survey questions are going to be whether our anglers are in support of, pursuing Atlantic salmon, or looking at into stocking them and evaluating them, and then into the future too. If we do proceed and stock Atlantic salmon, obviously that'll be a big question to both our salmon anglers and our non-salmon anglers is, are they satisfied with our Atlantic salmon program, or would they rather have one species or the other? We also put together an informational video, or we're in the process of putting together an informational video, and then there'll be a survey afterwards too. Pretty much asking the same question in our creel surveys is, are people willing to look at Atlantic salmon, or allow, are they willing to let GFP stock Atlantic salmon to evaluate Atlantic salmon? So a quick summary, what we're trying to do is, just increase the success of our salmon fishery. When it's popular, when catch rates are high, it's a very popular fishery, and a lot of people take advantage of it. When catch rates are low, like most fisheries, people don't take advantage of it. So we want to try to increase our angler success with our salmon program. What we found is that, Atlantic salmon may be a good fit. We see that there's a lot of states that are moving to Atlantic salmon. we've looked at the potential benefits of Atlantic salmon, and they're pretty staggering. So Atlantic salmon may be a new tool that we may use in South Dakota. Compare Atlantic salmon right alongside Chinook salmon stockings. That way we can compare 1-to-1, essentially which one gets into the hands of our anglers, and then also as we're taking public comment too, if there's any angler opinion one way or another to either of the species. And then, gathering public input, and then exploring hatchery production options as well. And that's all I had. I'd be happy to take any questions if you guys have any.
Questions for Mark?
Secretary.
Have you talked to North Dakota about this plan, or are they looking at something similar? Or?
They are not. They like the idea. Actually, Montana was more interested than North Dakota was. North Dakota, talking to Gangle and those guys, they're fine with us trying it, and I think they're going to do a wait and see how we respond. But yeah, they were supportive, but they're not going to jump in feet first anytime soon.
One question, Mark.
Yeah.
So one of the first reactions, if I remember, when Merwin and Talisman, everybody worked on the Chinook salmon issue was, well, how does this going to affect the growth rates of walleye? That seems to come up more than anything else. So I suppose within this gathering the public input, et cetera, one of the questions will be asked, I guess, will be, well, with our current bait fish and smelt populations in Hawaii, is this going to have a problem or an effect upon the weight gain of walleyes? And so that'll be a question. Do you have anything that?
We do. Well, I mean, we won't know exactly what the diets of the Atlantics are until we stock them and then evaluate the diets. But evidence suggests right now that they utilize rainbow smelt to a lesser extent than Chinook salmon. So if we do a 1-to-1 stocking right now, literature suggests that they will consume less rainbow smelt than the same number of Chinook salmon.
Okay.
But again, we won't know that
till you test it.
Until we try it. But that's what literature suggests.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dinner?
Thank you. You mentioned at the start about the people that are traveling 200 miles. So you've got a lot of non-resident people.
A lot of non-residents and
percentage-wise, do you know?
Yep, in all corners from South Dakota too. Yep.
You know the breakdown roughly of the non-resident versus the resident?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
No. We can find that for you though if you'd like it.
Go ahead.
Do you have any sense of how much money you're going to put towards this project, or what it would cost to?
The cost is, what we want to do is, have equal stockings of both Chinook and Atlantic. From what we can tell right now, it's about a 1-to-1, cost to raise both of them. The one difference is that we have a egg source, disease-free egg source, and Atlantic salmon are actually commercially reared, out in the ocean, out in those big net pens. Most of those fish are Atlantic salmon. And so we have an egg source, and the eggs are actually very cheap. And the last time we got a quote, we were looking at 200,000 eyed eggs for just over $10,000, about $12,000. So you compare that to our Whitlock spawning operations and how much money we spend in there to get our Chinook eggs, and it's vastly cheaper to just buy our eyed eggs. As far as the rearing goes, it's probably going to be almost the exact same as Chinook salmon. Again, that's something that our hatchery operations will have to evaluate as well too. This is all based on work they've done in Michigan and in the Northeast as well.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Yep.
Appreciate it.